Howdy, sailors. We've got a big topic on our hands today, so strap on your rain boots and let's go swimming.
Part of the journey is the end.
Letting go can be hard, even when what you want to let go of is bad. But when what you have to let go of is something good, it's even harder. Hey, that was pretty deep. What I want to talk about today is a strange literary and film parallel that I've recently noticed, and which ties together two of my favorite fictional universes, those of Star Wars and Harry Potter, created by George Lucas and J.K. Rowling, respectively. The parallel here isn't really between the universes, though, it's between the creators, Lucas and Rowling. Or Rowling and Lucas, whichever order sounds better. The parallel, to be short, is this. Neither creator knew when to let go and stop writing. To be fair, George Lucas seems to have moved past this, and indeed let go. He sold Star Wars to Disney to deal that is, safe to say, he's still impacting every Star Wars fan alive. George's case is also a lot different than J.K. Rowling's, but the similarities are there, and you better believe I'm going to hit you with them. So first things first, some backstory and guidelines. George Lucas is the creator of Star Wars. Say what you will about him, being an uncreative hack, a thief, untalented, whatever. Sorry, I'm not buying it. Go peddle your 18th century disease to a different anti-vaxxer because I'm not interested in it. Lucas officially created Star Wars in the 1970s, as in, that was when the first film was released. Lucas wrote and directed the film, then handed the directing reins over to Irvin Kershner for the sequel and Richard Marquand for the conclusion. Both Kershner, Marquand, and a handful of others, Lawrence Kasdan among them, helped Lucas write the next two films. However, Lucas still laid the major story beats, and nothing happened that he wasn't on board with. But The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are not George Lucas's films. They're part of his story, but not his films. More on this later. We got some good wind in our sails here and are now shooting forward to the late 1990s and early 2000s. Papa George has been sitting around twiddling his thumbs for a while when he suddenly decided it was about time to start cooking on those Star Wars prequels. The prequels each deserve their own series of videos, and maybe I'll make them someday, but the prequels and their reception have no real impact on this video, so just forget about them for now. So initially George wanted Steven Spielberg to direct episode 1. That didn't happen. So George decided,
fine. I'll do it myself.
And gave us not one, not two, but three George Lucas written and directed Star Wars films. These were his films set in his universe based on his characters. He could do whatever he wanted to, or with them. How people felt about them was irrelevant at this point. He made them, and made them in exactly the way he wanted. That is absolutely okay. However, Big Boy George also did plenty of things which are not okay, and which I feel are fundamentally wrong from an artistic standpoint. Mind, these have nothing to do with the writing or story, but creative integrity, and these are things which I feel J.K. Rowling is also currently doing. In film, there's something called the auteur theory, which, well, here's Google's definition.
The auteur theory, which was derived largely from Astruc's elucidation of the concept of camera stylo camera pen, holds that the director, who oversees all audio and visual elements of the motion picture, is more to be considered the author of the movie than is the writer of the screenplay.
So, George is the author of episodes 1 through 4. It's that simple. It's a fact. Sorry, it is. For not only did he direct these films, but he also wrote them. So he has a pretty decent claim to them. Now, I have a personal opinion that once a work of art in any form is complete, it should not be touched or altered in any way. This goes for books and movies. I think they can be remade, adapted, or things like that, but the original content should never be changed. George Lucas agrees with me as well. This is from a speech George Lucas gave to Congress about coloring black and white movies. There's no video of it, so I'm just going to read it to you in my best Papa George impression. I hope you enjoy. Today, engineers with their computers can add color to black and white movies, change the soundtrack, speed up the pace, and add or subtract material to the philosophical tastes of the copyright holder. Tomorrow, more advanced technology will be able to replace actors with fresher faces or alter dialogue and change the movement of the actor's lips to match. It will soon be possible to create a new original negative with whatever changes or alterations the copyright holder at the moment desires. The copyright holders so far have not been completely diligent in preserving the original negatives of films they control. In the future, it will become even easier for old negatives to become lost and be replaced by new altered negatives. This would be a great loss to our society. Our cultural history must not be rewritten. This is interesting because George famously went back into Lucasfilm archives around the time of the prequels to change scenes and footage from the original story to fit in with the content present in the prequels. This angered many fans, and rightly so. Even if people didn't like the prequels, they still always had those original films they loved so much to go back to. Until, of course, George changed them. Now, he never should have changed the films at all, but his main defense is that the alterations were part of his original vision, which he was not able to achieve at the time.
I get to do a lot of things now that I couldn't do before, create things that weren't possible to create before. I was always, and I will be on this, but I've always been sort of at the limit of what is possible in terms of storytelling. Things have advanced so far in the last 20 years in terms of your ability to portray things on the screen that were just literally impossible before.
This is a valid defense, however, it's not excused altering the original content. For instance, Jaws from Jaws was supposed to be seen much more in the original film than he actually was. However, since the shark robot didn't work right, Spielberg and friends had to shoot around it and ended up creating what is generally accepted to be a better film than what was intended. Shooting around Jaws was not Spielberg's original vision, but he ended up doing it and it's done. I think it'd be a crime for him to go back and refilm the movie to fit his original vision, and I'm sure he feels the same. So, I'm sorry, George, but I don't think I can buy the smallpox blanket you're trying to sell me here. A further note on these special edition changes. They're bad. And unnecessary. One of the changes which I feel best encapsulate this is dubbing over Boba Fett's original lines with audio from actor Tamir Morrison, who played Jango Fett in the prequels. I understand George's mentality. Well, Boba Fett is a clone of Jango Fett, so he should sound like Tamir Morrison. That makes sense. But the solution to this problem is not retroactively making Boba Fett sound like Jango Fett, it's proactively making Jango Fett sound like Boba Fett. The original voice of Boba Fett, Jason Wingreen, was still alive during the making of the prequels, so why not just get him to do the voice of the clones or play Jango Fett? I'm sure Lucas had his reasons, but either way, dubbing over his lines with those of another actor is not only strange, but also disrespectful to the original performance. Especially given the fact that Wingreen passed away in 2015, I really don't see how Lucas could defend this change with a clear conscience. Also, let's talk more about auteur theory. Based on the auteur theory, which Lucas does, or at least did, believe in, The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi are not Lucas's films to mess with. They're Irvin Kershner's and Richard Marquand's. So supposing altering films from the original state is even acceptable, which it's not, that is only assuming they are George's films. But the thing is, they're not. Therefore, Lucas altering those two films in any way whatsoever, title changes, special effects alterations, voice dubbing, is not acceptable. It's unclear how much the two directors really cared about these changes, or how they felt about them in general, though there are rumors that Irvin Kershner was pleased with Lucas adding windows to Cloud City. So there's that, I guess. My argument in this case ultimately boils down to is the fact that Lucas ruined the integrity of not just his work, but that of others too. He ruined a product that people had already loved and cared for decades, went back in his own word and violated what I think are some fairly simple rules for writing. One could also argue that he ruined his films and Star Wars in general through the poor scripts and overall writing of the prequels, but again, different video. George also then clung to the rights of the franchise for years, never seeming to be sure if he wanted to make more or not. Many fans treated Lucas horribly and demanded that he give them up, and things like that. Honestly, I feel bad for Lucas, but I understand people's frustrations with him. And now that he's let go, I definitely wish I could have seen his version of the sequel trilogy, especially given what Disney has done with it. But again, different video. In the end, though, I think that George realized a lot of his mistakes, and I really do think he feels bad. I genuinely believe that all George ever wanted to do was make movies for people to enjoy, and the world spat on him for that. Now, what does all this have to do with J.K. Rowling? J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series ended way back in 2007. This has not stopped her, however, from going back and trying to make repeated changes to the story, lore, and canon. I'm typically against adding to a story once it has been finished, and I'm also usually against any kind of expanded universe content in general. Sorry, Star Wars fans. I'll get more into this in another video I've planned, but basically I dislike the dissolution of story and reckless adding or changing of content just for the sake of doing it. Sound familiar?
It should!
I think there's a time and a place to just let go. I realize that this can be hard, but I also think it's necessary. George realized this, and I hope that Rowling will too. Because between the nonsensical Pottermore updates, Fantastic Beasts movies, Cursed Child, and all that madness, I've really lost a lot of respect for J.K. Rowling. Especially as a writer. She hasn't gone into her books and actually physically changed things like George did, but she's trying to retroactively change them through updates and new content. I'm sorry, but I personally will never accept any new Harry Potter content from J.K. Rowling unless it is in the only form of Harry Potter content which I think counts. A new novel. I say this because just as George Lucas only has the right to change his story through new films of his own, so too do I feel that Rowling should only be changing her own story by actually writing more of it. And I mean truly writing, as in publishing new literary work that can be held in the hand and read in its full form. Not screenplays made to collect books, not weird internet stories, not stupid tweets or bad movies. What she has done now is the same as what George did all those years ago. She has clung on desperately to a franchise that needs to rest. She's made pointless changes, angered much of her fanbase, and ruined what made her original story great in the first place. Just like I never needed to see this guy's oeuvre in Return of the Jedi. Neither do I need to know that wizards apparently used to just crap themselves, or that Nagini the snake used to be Ezreal's girlfriend. So, when is it time to stop? When it's over, of course. The best part of the story can be the end. Just look at Logan or even the Deathly Hallows. The Deathly Hallows, as a book, functions because it is the end. After this, there is no more. Harry has to grow up, or he has to die. Then he realizes that to do one, maybe he has to do the other. The Deathly Hallows is a book about death, facing it and coming to terms with it. Arguably, this is the overarching theme of Rowling's whole incredible series, coming to terms with death. And death, ultimately, sorry I have to do it, is the endgame. And ultimately, Rowling wrote a book about coming to terms with the end, because everything has one. There's always a final frame, always a final page. And when we see that final frame or close the last book for the last time, we've learned something. We've had an experience we can never repeat, but only experience in a new way. Rewatching or rereading our favorite stories is beneficial because we can learn new things. Not because the story has changed, but because we have. And when the story has been changed or been added to, that experience and those lessons just aren't the same. I tend to get worried when people say things like Disney or George Lucas ruined Star Wars because it's not that simple to just ruin something. But it is possible, and in a way I think George did ruin Star Wars, and I think in a way that Rowling is ruining Harry Potter. But the story of Harry is over, just like the story of Luke was over. And if the fans can realize that, then I think that maybe the writer should too. So maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't. I didn't create Harry Potter or Star Wars, I just love them both, and I really don't know anything. But those are some of my thoughts on them, and hopefully they were interesting to you. And if they weren't, sorry partner.